think there is a person from Australia, and there is 5 a.m. there. So quite, I'm really touched by this. And I'll be happy if you leave your videos on to have, in these times where we have these digital meetings, something more human. So in the next hour, I'm going to introduce this topic, and I think you can post questions on the chat, and then we can discuss. We'll have 1 hour more at least to discuss things. I know some of you, but some of you I don't. So just a few words about me. I wear various hats, but most people know me under 2 hats. One is the data hat, and the other is sorry, something happens, and the other is the org hat. And when I'm wearing the data hat, what I provide is data management services, mainly related to integrating data as knowledge graphs, and as well as consulting for data strategy. And org can mean various things like organism, organic, or even orgy, but what I use it for is for organizational consulting and coaching. And in fact, wearing that hat, I joined SCiO in 2012. I think Benjamin joined a bit earlier. So it was a great and friendly community. I remember we used to meet, to have development meetings at the building at the 2nd floor, and at the 1st floor, it was the British Interplanetary Society. So it was very special to be part of the discourse which was happening above that of the interplanetary dialogue. And then I joined Metaform and other such communities, and that was and is still a very nice experience. I learned a lot. I shared my ideas. People liked my ideas. I liked that they liked my ideas. And yeah, but at some point, I just realized that I was barking up the wrong tree, in a way that, yes, we can tap each other's shoulders, support each other, but it's not very difficult to do things among like-minded people. So what I wanted to do was somehow to reach out. And there was one barrier for that. It was the system jargon and the cybernetic jargon that was used. So I had to solve it to reach to people that were outside that community, that we can really make some kind of change. And the other thing which I had trouble with is that in most of the cases, people that brought different organizational models, they used necessarily models to understand organizations. Even the most rigorous one, I found a bit too neat to help with organizations which are, I believe, messier. So I was looking for ways not to use that jargon and not to use models when I communicate these things. And that is what is one of the drivers of the work I'll be talking about this evening. But it was a sort of a small driver. There was a bigger one, and it was the common practice of using KPIs, best practices, methodologies, and frameworks when managing and improving and changing organizations. And I used a lot of them and developed quite a few. But at some point, I wanted to go beyond that, but also in a way to go below that. So why did I want to go beyond that? Well, I discovered that best practices, methodologies, frameworks, and techniques, they may be different than each other, but they have something in common. And the common thing is that they're all prescriptive. And prescriptive practices and methodologies, they have this few problems that are based on correlations. They do oversimplification and they ignore the history and context of the organizations. But worst of all, they build bad habits of first looking for templates and methodologies than first thinking. The other issue is that while they have some utility when there is certainty, it goes down when things become more uncertain and can be even harmful. So that's about why going above and why going below. I was looking for something deeper, something that could equally work for projects, but also for organizations, for society, and be valid also for people, but also for other organisms and for ecosystems. And today we will be able only to scratch the surface. There will be, of course, a dialogue of 1 hour, which I think then we can go a bit below. And then for sure you can check out the book. So in case I have to bring something which is not a model, not a framework, so what it is, what kind of tool it is. So if you just have a look at this picture for a moment. So what actually happens is that you need 1 second to understand what's going on, another second that something is wrong, and another what's wrong. And there are similar situations. So this is kind of an organization that is happening here. There's similar situations that we face every day in our organizations, but it may take years to understand what's going on and that something is wrong and what's wrong. So I was thinking of the ability to really do that very quickly. And because of that, the metaphor I'm using is that of glasses. And I insist on talking about glasses and not lens, because unlike just lens, glasses, they have frames. And frames, they are a constant reminder that every perspective, even the one that I'm bringing here, it has limitations. It creates a bias, and of course, it leaves a blind spot. And apart from that, these are personal things. They're made to fit. My glasses wouldn't fit a mouse or a cat, although the internet is full of memes trying to disprove that. And with these glasses, we can look at our organizations, and sorry that I'm showing building now that we work all from home, but it just applies the same way. And looking at organizations, what we're going to see is not necessarily what we usually see, like processes, system, org charts, services, and this kind of thing. We're going to see certain balances, the one between autonomy and cohesion, the one between stability and diversity, and a third one between exploration and exploitation. And there is one that wraps them all. So starting with autonomy and cohesion, I'm a sailor, and one of the first things that I found about sailing is that for every hour of sailing, you have to spend at least 1 more hour or more maintaining the boat. And that's not easy, but there are people that believe that it is, and even one that produced the famous sailboat maintenance flowchart, which everything is based actually on. You can decide everything based on 2 questions. One is, does it move? So if the answer is yes, you have the second question, should it? If yes, you can relax, drink a beer, everything is fine. If no, you have to find a way and fix it so it doesn't move. So if the answer of does it move is no, then again, you ask, should it? And if it's again no, you can relax, drink a beer. Alternatively, if it's yes, you have to use a lubricant. So in a way, with this kind of approach, you may think that it's all a matter of giving or taking freedom. And it looks like this in a way, but things get a bit more complicated. Yet I will start with a very simple example. So imagine you go one day to work, and you see that you have 9 tasks, of which 6 you know the solution for, and the other 3 still not, but enough time to find it. But as in the perfect world, in the real world, there is the boss who comes at that day to ask you for a report to produce on the day, although it was for another time. And then also an unexpected meeting, which will take up some of the time allocated for these tasks. And at that meeting, you learn that one of the solutions that you had in mind for this task couldn't be applied because of a certain rule you didn't know about that was used in this organization. So if you came in the morning with 6 things to do and 3 to solve and do, you end up having 8 to do and 4 to solve and do, which is quite unpleasant. But why this is actually happening? One way to analyze it is through 3 dimensions about the capacity, decisions, and adaptability. Maybe before that, I should mention that just joining an organization results in a triple loss of freedom. It's the freedom of where to be, and the freedom of what to do, and even the freedom of how to do it. And where is not a matter of only a physical dimension, it's a matter of dimension of norms as well. Imagine, for example, just a waitress that is one day at the restaurant and not happy for not getting a tip, and the next evening she serves guests, and then somebody's making fun and tips her, and so she's angry because she got a tip, but she's not angry when the same person brings a bottle of wine for the same price. So different norms would work in different places, and every time we join an organization, we have to somehow comply with these norms, which take part of our freedom away. But here, if we look at the dimension of capacity, so what happens is that there are certain, there is a meeting point between demands and constraints. There are external demands and constraints that they come transform to the tasks you have to do, no matter if you're facing the client or through various levels of interpretation. And also internal, these levels of interpretation, exactly what to do, and the things that are available as constraints in terms of company rules or kind of norms and so forth. And of course, this meets your own capacity. The other issues we have with decisions, it's quite easy when the companies are small, because everybody is equally exposed to the consequences of their actions. But then when the company grows, there is a split. People that do coordination, they just go a bit away from the front line, and basically the distance between thinkers and doers widens. So thinkers can do things that they're not exposed to and don't know quite well, but they of course intervene because somehow the feeling of responsibility and control makes them do so. So you can say that small companies are like leopards. They're agile and fast with sharp senses, while huge companies, they are more like a giraffe with a small brain in a head above from where the action is. But there is a bit of advantage there, that this head can see over the trees. So as long as leaders do not intervene, as long as they can manage intelligently their ignorance, things could be fine. But also don't think that necessarily, if big organizations are like, again, like a leopard, very agile and everything, that would work in all cases, although it may appear so. But evolutionary, that's actually not true. For example, if you compare a leopard with a sloth, while a leopard is very fast, or is extremely slow, not only moving, but also in terms of metabolism. A sloth can process one leaf for a month in their system. So, but that kind of slow metabolism actually made them survive for millions of years. So let's not take it directly as it should. Adaptability is related to the fact that this high involvement comes from responsibility, insufficient feedback, and mistrust, but it can, at the extreme, bring micromanagement, which also can leave less time for actual management, and that brings more situations for which the team is not prepared. As a result, limiting autonomy harms both short and long-term adaptability. And but what happens if there is too much autonomy? Well, that's not good as well, because things are not aligned, because there is a lot of inefficiency, silos are grown, and there are problems with interoperability. And at the extreme, the organization can simply disintegrate with too much. So we need a cohesion. We need things that they produce a whole that works together. And there are various forces and factors and tools for that. For example, shared resources is a factor that demands cohesion. Work dependencies, you get something as output of somebody else that is input for your process. Also, the efficiency economies of scale, things that are complementary, and the synergy is an attractor of big magnitude. And also we have to maintain the organizational identity, but that's at the organizational level. The cohesion forces also at personal level, and that is this drive to belong, for safety, to reduce uncertainty, to increase self-esteem. All these things, they work and work with the same strength as the other. So for the example I started with, the cohesion tools were the report, the meeting, and the rule. But of course, there are many more, like goals, for example, or like coordination, like planning. What is common for all these tools of cohesion? First, it's a pity that we don't think in that terms for them, because it would bring a lot of interesting insights. But what is common for them is that they all bring constraints. So, for example, goals, we don't do this or that or third thing, but we sort of agree on doing one of them. For planning, we don't do whatever, we do what we plan to do and when we plan to do it. So all these things are restraining, they put constraints. So it's nice to balance autonomy and cohesion. That's quite important for dealing with for high performance, for dealing with uncertainty, and for basically organizational health. And in fact, that is quite valid for every organization, like a band, like a jazz band, for example, even where the things like improvisation are very important, they're restrained with certain rules that have to be applied, otherwise it will be no music. But here, all of them are sort of internal, while in many cases you could have also external factors for cohesion. Such an example are markets. There could be two units that are not very much dependent, but then the markets is sort of bringing this cohesion outside, and they could influence each other either by reputation or by other means. Another thing is, if you remember, when Trump was elected, he said, "I'm a unifier." That was, of course, not true, because the American nation was polarized extremely after that. But in a way, it was actually true, because many people that didn't work together, they started working together because there was something uniting them that was external. So that could actually work, but there is a risk. For example, I've observed in some NGOs and political parties where this is the case, so they keep this autonomy and cohesion, and the cohesion is brought with such an external factor that the weight is coming from things that they are against, not for, at some point can bring a very bad result when these things is not replaced with other cohesion measures. Also, this starts to hint at the fact that there are different kinds of cohesion. And another hint coming from this picture is that there is a balance inside balance in a way. So the balances are forming a fractal. And that means whenever you have at some level of identity, like a team, a unit, a department, or division, this good balance of autonomy and cohesion, that may not produce good results if that's not the case also at the level up or down. And by up and down, I do not mean this spatial metaphor that implies hierarchy. It could be something very agile and still, but we have these different scales because of different levels of identity that needs to be maintained. Like it could be a project, it could be a team, it could be some kind of task force or division or whatever is branch in the company, whatever. I can give you many examples with that, but for example, in many public sector organizations and educational organization, I also observed, you could have this situation where a certain unit has a very nice maintenance of autonomy and cohesion, but that's not the case on the level up. For example, because that person leading the unit is not allowed to hire and fire. Or it's also quite popular with the agile practices. You can have fantastic things managed in an agile way, but that is at the detriment of the whole organization. So you have high performance locally. This is creating a local optimum at the expense of various things like, for example, if something IT related to integration, or you bring the application-centric mindset, which has a lot of issues, and so on. And these kind of attempts for scaled agile, like the scaled agile framework or large-scale Scrum, whatever, they do not actually solve that very efficiently. The other phenomenon that when disturbance is found, it's misdiagnosed because this balance between autonomy and cohesion is not understood. And then people tend to oscillate between, not people, organizations, between centralization and decentralization. And if you want to have outside organizations, that's just a good example of where globally such thing is kept well. But by such thing, I mean the balance between autonomy and cohesion. That would be the World Wide Web. The World Wide Web is so successful because there this kind of balance is managed naturally. So you have autonomy to read, to publish, to produce web applications, to use different browsers, to produce new browsers, and all these kind of things. And they come at a very low cost or for free. But that is happening because there are agreements. We use HTTP protocol, which HTML, all these things, they bring cohesion in a way that does not reduce autonomy. So that was about the first balance very quickly, and now about stability and diversity. So stability and diversity is a strange kind of a balance, and that's the one that in different workshops I found people sort of not complaining about, but having difficulties understanding at first. And the reason for that is that stability itself is something that works in time, while diversity more it works in space. We talk about different things when we talk about diversity, not different moments so much. While stability is kept, is restored, is destabilized, this kind of dynamic. But if you relax this kind of language constraints and think about stability as sameness and diversity as otherness, things become a bit more clear. And the other interesting thing is that this balance is in fact 3 balances for the price of 1. That's quite of a gain, because stability itself is a balance. It's like things can be stable and unstable. So the balance between stability and change, basically. And diversity itself is also a balance, the balance between diversity and homogeneity. But it becomes really interesting when diversity and stability just start working dynamically with each other. And the best example for that I can bring, so I'm just keeping the first 2 balances that are included here somehow, the one for stability itself and for diversity itself, and I'm bringing them together in the example of the immune system, which is a very interesting topic and quite important now with the situation with the virus. And I hope there are no immunologists or biologists in the room, so that I can be free to talk nonsense. So the organism is quite, I mean, all the time invaded by different pathogens, like viruses, bacteria, whatever, and it has to be protected. It's protected by the good guys, which are the B cells, the T cells, and NK cells. So NK cells is natural killer cells. But the really important role is for the B cells. So how do they work? Maybe before how do they work, to tell you what is in fact the biggest challenge that they need to solve. They have no idea who will invade the body. Absolutely no. So full uncertainty, and they have to find a way to deal with that. So how do they work? They have these Y-shaped receptors, which are protein chains on their surface that detach, flow with the blood, and when they get to the pathogen, they attach to the similar receptors. And if the shape matches, that pathogen is marked for destruction. So how do they solve the problem with uncertainty? They solve it by having enormous diversity. In fact, their mutation rate is 1,000,000 times higher than the average mutation rate of any other cell in the body. So, and that randomness increases tremendously the chance that they would match the receptors of such a pathogen, which is the way to actually mark it for destruction. And it also needs to match not only the quality, but the quantity, which happens is with another interesting mechanism that the better the match, the faster they reproduce in the, for example, lymph nodes, that they just start reproducing so that there are more of those matching receptors to mark more of the invading cells. And that's also interesting because, in fact, you see the balance in a way that B cells, they need to have high mutation. They have to be as diverse as possible so that they can deal with uncertainty. At the same time, all other cells, they have to have a smaller rate of mutation as possible. Why? Because, well, in other cases, there are cancers and other problems, and that's an important balance to keep. But that's on top of another balance, because organizational stability is the stability of organisms would be balanced with the diversity of organisms, and that is on top of another, that the stability of an ecosystem would be balanced with the diversity of an ecosystem. Just the top one actually was between the mutation and reproduction, in the sense that it balances matching quantity by the means of, the better the match, the higher reproduction rate. So all these forms a fractal emitting go, which means that basically what I'm saying is that it's all turtles all the way down, but just not turtles balances. And then if stability is too much, we have things like homophily, which is natural but dangerous. We have things like groupthink. And overall stability can be, let's say, good or bad, and bad is related to some pathologies. Like we have a stability bliss that is actually a package of few pathologies, and pathological stability. Stability bliss is appearing with the kinds of species like organizational atrophy, when different kind of responses are not trained and they just are not responsive anymore, like hyper efficiency, which suffocates innovation, and also it doesn't prepare the organization for things that they can expect it, because things which could bring the right kind of solution in unknown circumstances just are taken out, because in normal they're not needed, they're just additional cost. And also organizational myopia or even blindness. The pathological stability, it's another interesting phenomenon. We will not take time to discuss it now, because I prefer to tell you the opposite problem, when there is too much diversification caused by external factors. And there could be various external factors to which, when the organization reacts, they diversify. But the popular ones are compliance. Something appears, change in legislation like GDPR, you need to change things inside. Or it could be just the competition. Some competitor is bringing something that you don't have, so you have to catch up. Or it could be a new technology trend, like now it's with the artificial intelligence. And organizations that have this habit of sort of matching boxes against boxes, so like some mirroring of all these things. So whenever compliance requirement would appear, you would have at the beginning somebody responsible, or even a task force that would slowly become a compliance department. So it have the same kind of thing to match what is the new irritation from the environment. And that would happen the same with the competition. You would just try to, for example, provide new kind of service to compete with that new competitor, or you would hire data scientists so that you would have to catch up with the new technology trend. But all this internal diversification, it requires a lot of additional coordination. And all that additional coordination, of course, would mean that things become internally more complex, and the attention to solve all the issues that arise is taking up resource that would leave organizations with fewer resources to deal with external complexity because of the increased internal one. The next and the last balance is between exploration and exploitation. And one way to show it would be to see what ants are doing when foraging. And here, actually, I think we are doing well with time. I can do a small simulation. So ants, they are individually quite stupid. They just move randomly. They wander about. And at some point, things change. So what you see here is one in the middle. It's a nest, ant's nest. In our world simulation world, there are 200 ants, and these things around, they're food sources. So what is going on? they just ramble about. And when an ant finds a food source, it would take a piece and go back to the nest. When doing that, each ant would leave a pheromone trail. When other ants, they stumble upon a pheromone trail, they tend to follow it to the food source. So this is the way they signal each other what to do. This is the way they bring cohesion. They coordinate each other. They communicate where the food source is. So the other ant will get a piece and will bring it back to the nest. So, and let's see actually what's going on. We can do it in different ways, but to be as simple as possible, we will change just one variable. And this variable is how quickly the pheromone trail evaporates. And check how efficient the ants would be to gather everything from the 3 piles. And we would measure that in time steps so that we can compare different situations. So let's start with an evaporation rate of 20 time steps on 19 or whatever. I needed to be easier to actually think of 20 or 22, doesn't matter. So in this case, it actually evaporates very quickly. So let's see what's going on. You see the thing that left, and you see the light is actually the pheromone trail, and you see here how each quantity is depleted. So let's see. Now we have evaporation rate of 22. And in that case, it took 1,240 time steps to gather all the food. All right. Let's now reduce it. Let's have it, let's say 10. We should actually do it several times and take the average, but let's see, maybe we'll be fine with. So in this case, the evaporation rate, when it is, so it evaporates for, it's 10, then we have 630. So, but what about if it doesn't evaporate at all? Let's make it so it stays and they can follow it. Let's take the average because here it's very close. So the first was 630, now it's 789. We can do it again. Again, 630. I can do it again. And now we have almost 1,000. So I haven't now calculated the average, but it is maybe around 750, something like that, for that situation. So why this is the case? Well, this is the case because so when the evaporation rate is high, there is not enough pheromone so that they can find the food sources. And then we have that situation which we had a population of 10, and the last one, when it was 0, we had a situation where, again, it took them more time to gather. Why is it so? Well, when there is so much pheromone trail, they are just over exploiting and under exploring. They're not enough. There are too many ants engaged to follow the pheromone trails, and not sufficient amount of ants that they have nothing to follow and just rumble around and explore to find new food sources. So basically, in the right-hand case, we have a situation with over-exploration. Then we have a balanced one, and then we have one with over-exploitation. And that's even more interesting because, again, it works like a fractal. So if we zoom out and see our society, what would be exploration at the ground scale and exploitation? Well, that would be research and application. But inside research, we have, again, exploration and exploitation. For example, this would be curiosity-driven research against market-driven research. And here you can see interesting things like when it was the crisis of 2007, 2008, a lot of curiosity-driven research was cut out, and what was stimulated was market-driven research, so that in fact the research was stimulated only for the things that would bring immediate results, and they are focused. But people tend to forget things. Now, for example, we have the antibiotics industry, which is a multi-billion industry, but that was a matter of discovering monoclonal antibodies in the 70s, which is entirely based on curiosity-driven research. And if we now zoom in inside a company, we can see exploration, not under this name, but usually appearing as marketing, as research, and as innovation. But again, it works at different levels. If we just see outside the market itself, then you can observe the startups. So there are many startups, but only a few are successful. But what's more interesting is that there was a study showing that successful startups, 2/3 of them changed their initial plans. They had to do something differently. So you can see the startups itself as the market way of exploring what works and what doesn't. So this is, again, exploration and exploitation. And you can see that happening in various ways. For example, in Twitter and application markets, you can see exploration and exploitation at a very, very fast and short cycles. But what is important to understand is that normally exploration is threatened, because exploitation, it's easy to defend, to justify, because sort of the result of that is certain, while the exploration is risky, and we need to support it. The caveat is that exploitation you can manage, but you cannot really manage exploration. You can enable it. And this happens by lifting constraints. So you lift to explore, you put back to exploit. That's a very important way to understand how this works. And of course, you have got the sense that these balances are different, but they're also, in a way, similar. Somehow there is a relation between autonomy, diversity and exploration as well. It is some relation between cohesion, stability, and exploitation. And indeed there is, it's actually easy to observe. If, for example, you see children playing, you can, like a make-believe play, you can see all of them at once right away because they create an organization themselves. And that's a very interesting organization because they're in full control. They control the organization and also the environment. So they do not do whatever. They have certain kind of rules. And so they apply constraints, otherwise the game is random, it's boring. You need to have to play certain roles, or you need to make it so that, for example, a flat stone behaves like a car by making it sound like a car. But you have to actually keep this role. If you take it out, it will not be anymore a car, but a bird. So you have to sort of follow your own rules for that. But of course, at some point, they exhaust the territory that they demark, and you need to find new rules. So here is where the exploration comes. You can try new rules, whatever works, you bring it in, and the game changes and it evolves. But again, you have to change the things to bring diversity. Otherwise, it will be stale. It will be the same. At the same time, during the play, it needs to have stability. If something goes out, you need to bring it down. In terms of exploration, exploitation, you see all this regulation happening so that the game is kept in the fun zone. And to actually build this as an awareness, as a habit, if we believe that such glasses are useful, then how we can make wearing them a habit. Now, you remember that these balances, they work at the individual, organizational, society level or scales. And it's a huge topic to talk how they work at the individual level, to talk about productivity, for example, or life choices or whatever, and society level. But I'm not going to talk about that, and you will not find that in the book as well. Yet, because they work there, you can use them to hone this habit. Because, I mean, at personal level, it's so convenient because we have ourselves handy at all the times. And the society level is quite easy as well, because we, unlike organizations which are basically simpler than society, society is easier to observe. There are a lot of helpers like media and social media and other observational magnifying glasses. So for that, there are various practices. For example, at the individual level, you can see all these balances at the routine things like taking a shower or making a coffee or being in a traffic jam, and during sports. At society level, adaptation is very interesting to observe, especially when something changes. Like if you have these situations with two autonomy and cohesion balances which are fully kept, it may happen that things are actually very different. In the left case, we have a normal situation, and in the right case, we have a crisis situation. So if we measure the amount of cohesion available in society by the angle of that seesaw on the right, then we have much more cohesion during the crisis, although there the autonomy and cohesion balance is kept just by having more cohesion in normal times. And in fact, we now have observed this crisis-induced cohesion with the corona, which brings in many cases higher centralization. But people are willing to tolerate higher centralizations. They're willing to forgo certain freedoms to get more protection or to have a central source of information, and so on. The trouble is, and that's also a very common misunderstanding about the agile approaches, and the trouble is that certain things are not always made to work well in centralization, because not only in crisis, but also in high-risk situations, centralization and hierarchy, they have their role. I wouldn't go on a ship managed by an agile team, actually. But also, if you bring the centralization that is normally in government to the ship, you have the other problem. Imagine a sailor sees an iceberg and wants to inform the management about that, and then the clerk at the ship says, okay, here is your iceberg sighting form, fill it in, we'll review it. All these things are quite inadequate in such situations, but that's also a matter of how all these ideas of state and nation work now. It's a 17th century establishment which maybe needs to be rethought. It's also a matter of how what kind of constraint tools are used. Like, for example, laws are very important tools, and we have things like the Constitution. The Constitution of the United States is a parsimonious one, only 8,000 words, while the one of India is 150,000. But there are even ideas now that this is not okay, because certain kind of restrictions may appear too restrictive in normal times and not restrictive enough in a crisis time. So even there are talks about dynamical constitutions. And even at local level is more interesting. They have small things, but they're quite significant to watch. For example, here in Flanders, there was an interesting case where competition during crisis, which is a manifestation of autonomy, was going into cooperation. Sorry, it's competition. On the right should be cooperation, which is something that is typical. It's a cohesion manifestation, and that was the case for the flower growers in Flanders, where 7 of them combined their efforts to make a web shop. And but of course, a lot of businesses are hit, especially small businesses, with that. And you can see in the streets window shops that are empty, and that is really depressing. And the whole society is shaken by such things. And I was really pleased to see here in Leuven an amazing initiative where the municipality paid art projects to actually do something with these empty shops. So this is actually such a case. This is an abandoned shop where this kind of art is produced. Other cohesion things emerged, like I think it was in April or May, the teddy bear started to appear in windows of houses. And of course, you think at the beginning, well, of course, that is the famous bear hunt, which started in Australia and UK, so that kids can do things, don't get bored. But here it shifted its meaning. It had a different, maybe because at some point, all these bears behind these glasses, and maybe because it's Flanders, and in Flanders, the word for teddy bear is the same word as it is for hug. And these hugs that we are deprived from, they appeared somehow in this way to compensate. So the fabric of society, when torn at one place, tries to bring cohesion at another. And at some point, it became sort of a symbol with this kind of posters like Stop COVID. And because this is very probably one of the few things that unites us all at this point, I think this would be good way to finish, also having in mind that I have just a few minutes left. in which I can just tell you that for more information, of course, I'll be happy to get in contact. I got questions about the book. The book is available on Amazon in Kindle. Very soon will appear as a paperback actually this month. And then there will be audio later this year, and outside Amazon, it will appear with Barnes & Noble and Apple iBooks also later this year. Well, thank you. That was it from me.
Thank you, Ivo. That was a wonderful introduction. You have the capacity to start in a very simple way and gradually steer us into the complexity of things. We have some room for questions, and perhaps you can go back to the large screen so that we can see each other. Are there any questions? It was a very rich introduction, so I can imagine that there are questions.
Well, not really a question, but a remark of seeing what Ivo really states clearly about the centralization as a consequence of the notion of a crisis. In the Netherlands, we have some issues with the COVID attack, let's say that way. And we've got the decentralized organization called GGD, and things are not going that well. So their first reaction was, we should centralize. We should make it one organization. So that was a very good example of what Ivo has explained, and we see in real life.
Yeah. What's through my attention is basically, Ivo, you're talking about essential balances, but your main point of departure is that we need to look at reality as something with disbalances, and that we need to look at reality in a kind of layered fashion, because what seems stable at one layer can become disbalanced by another layer. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. But you have also the other case where certain things are indeed balanced, but the way they are balanced is not sustainable, or something is not working because it's not easy to understand what brings this balance and where. That's why I try to explain why here things like models would not work. You need to develop this ability to see them this way. And unfortunately, our education is working in the other direction, or you can find in MBA programs and other things are not preparing us to diagnose and design in the way that things can work well.
Mm-hmm. There was a question from Pablo. Pablo?
Yes, I'm very, very new to this organization and to the very topic of system thinking, and I was fascinated how you can apply this model that Ivo was proposing from teams to society or political systems as a whole. And I was thinking how at the same time you can have balances that have been working for part of the population, but not been working for others, and somehow you create an imbalance and then produces, for example, this polarization that we have experienced in in recent times. And yeah, and I was wondering how it can be seen from system design perspective, or like a solution for society's problems, like for example in let's say what we have experienced recently in the United States, but also in Europe.
Thank you, Pablo. In fact, I think I managed to not, apart from the introduction where I talked about SCiO, I managed not to use the word system throughout. And in that sense, this doesn't require any kind of preparation or any kind of literature that you need to know. On the contrary, it tries to just be addressing innocent audience that is not enticed by such thing. And your question is pointing towards how this is working in society, and that is a very important and interesting thing, for which I would be very happy to speculate, and I do a lot. But my observation in the last 25 years are over organizations. So I can talk from practice only about organizations and maybe at personal level. The other things it's interesting to discuss, but I've never been deep in them enough to feel confident that I can answer your question well. As I said previously, it's very important to intelligently manage your own ignorance.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Now, I must admit, when having read your book, I was extremely inspired. The question that remained in my head is, well, you know, it's basically relatively simply to see the balances or imbalances and what causes it. But what was more difficult for me is to see the potential in the disbalances and to start to reflect in an authentic way and well explore paths that were not explored to solve the tensions caused by disbalance. Have you any recommendation on how you can start to explore the potential of the disbalances?
Yeah, in fact, that was a part which wasn't included in the manuscript. Sorry for that. And it's actually underdeveloped, but it's a matter of sort of walking the talk. This whole thing started as workshops in 2014. And the workshops, they had games and things, but again, so you have a book and you read several hundred pages, or you go to a workshop which is one day. So how can you actually have such a thinking habit to work? It needs more practice. So there's some guidance there included, which is basically way to for example, new way to observe when you do sports or when you do certain routines or when you do other things. The whole point is that anything else would mean prescribing. So prescribing a way to get this habit, which is very difficult to do, especially with this. It's not about that. In fact, it's a matter of whatever would work in the concrete situation as to diagnose something or to design something or to look at situation and find a good decision or to find a good question to ask. All these things, they would happen differently depending on the context. That's why there are no prescriptions. It's just a matter of being able to see things differently. And I found out that cultivating this habit help helps a lot.
Mhm.
But of course, this is also a very challenging thing in all organizational consulting. It needs itself to keep them. We need many methods to appear, so diversity of these approaches, and I'm now helping different coaches to start to add first this practice of bringing these skills to their clients.
Mhm.
But overall, there is not enough tradition for doing so. So if you compare decades of organizational theory and consulting and whatever, we have a lot of models, we have a lot of practices, and all the consulting. So McKinsey, Boston Consulting, big companies that are doing any kind of services, that they apply certain approaches because they need to have a lot of reach through young, bright consultants that apply the same templates everywhere. And the other thing, which is appreciating complexity and doing something else that you're not prepared for because you don't know the history and the context of where you go. So you cannot really allow yourself to be driven by the hypothesis bias that always comes. Of course, I've seen this in other organizations who do the same, it will work. Is needs more application to mature. Apart from this approach that I'm bringing, I've seen only a few other approaches that are not based on methodologies, best practices, and models. One of them is the so-called micro-narratives techniques of Cynthia Kurtz or around the Canavin framework that actually try with the completely different way to understand what's going on without this kind of pre-classified frame.
Yeah, thank you. Are there any more questions? Ivo, can you perhaps unshare your screen so that we can see each other? Yeah, thank you. So are there any questions? Well, I still have one, and it's about one specific balance, the autonomy cohesion balance. You have an example in your book explaining how the two are really interwoven. The example of how a company can decide to change their market segmentation, which is creating a new cohesion in order to enhance the autonomy of the account managers working in the newly defined space. Yeah. I was wondering if there are, if you have discovered certain prototypes of ways of how cohesion at one level creates autonomy at another level and vice versa.
That's in fact always the case. When you zoom out or in, it's a matter of shifting the identity focus. Very similar with the practice that is in fact quite popular in SCiO around the VSM, and in fact this was what influenced a lot this particular balance. But the simplest example is you have a focus on one organization. Let's say that's a team or that's an organizational unit, and it's led by somebody. So that somebody, of course, would have a better working unit if that unit is balanced in terms of autonomy and cohesion.
Mhm.
But you can see that as an inwards and outwards vector. So the better coordinated, the better united, the better working as one the unit is, the better it could have autonomy compared to other units.
Okay.
So the internal concern is to bring cohesion, and the external, when that unit leader is cooperating or competing with others, would be for more autonomy.
Mhm. Okay. No, thank you. In your book, you're also touching upon what I found a new interpretation of the requisite variety principle with fourth overarching balance,
Yeah.
and the responses. Could you share a bit about that?
Yes. Well, that's true. In fact, the book has 5 chapters. The first 3 are for these 3 essential balances, which I think is something quite natural to acquire. And then there are 2 more chapters, let's say a bit more advanced. The one between stimuli and responses, its main task is to bring better understanding what is common between the 3 essential balances. And also in cases where go to the next level, where you put the glasses of one balance to see something through the glasses of another balance. So sort of a second order observation, if we just need to bring this, again, cybernetic jargon. And of course, the whole meat of that is the Ashby's law of requisite variety, which I found very badly explained everywhere. And I tried a completely different way of explaining it, also recast in terms of another balance, and seeing all situations that are presented, quite a big diversity of cases. So you understand that I wouldn't be very convincing if I do not apply the balances themselves inside the book. And if you pay attention, you'll find that everywhere. And one is, of course, the diversity of different examples to help grow this skill. And this balance is quite universal. I use it a lot. That's one of my first attractions to cybernetics. But I put it as a meta balance, as something additional, because I found that people have trouble applying it. It's too abstract because it uses a very strange measure variety, which itself has huge varieties. It can be many things at once, and it's not easy to. That's why I even excluded it here. In fact, in many cases, I tried to explain it in a different way, in a new way, with new examples. This is also what I tried in the chapter 4, with entirely different kind of approach and going from different angles. But in terms of attempts to be very, let's say, to do something very quick, my record is I think 2 minutes, which I didn't do myself. I just found this quite known case where you see the balance at work very quickly. And what happens when the potential to do that is exhausted. But of course, things are way more complex than that, unfortunately. And here comes, well, things like understanding the involved risk and variety of response, like the ones that with I don't know what happened with the screen, with the so-called RGB space, where you match this kind of sorry, something happened at my side. I'll try to restart it, but basically different ways to achieve it by increasing the variety of response or reducing or displacing the variety of the stimuli. But all this needs the careful working out, understanding the means, understanding the risks involved, understanding also the third variable, because we have stimuli responses and the variety of the goal, and that is not always easy to grasp. So I don't know for who this will work well, but I sort of also spread the risk between understanding the three balances and not understanding that at all, which is fine, or understanding that and preferring that and not so much the other specific cases. Of course, the best situation is when they're used in combination, which I do in my my work.
No, thank you. I must say that well, I enjoyed very much reading the book, and it's one of the few books when I read it that I promised myself to read it a second time. And what I appreciated is that, in fact, each chapter is written in a double way. It's with a story and then with notes. And reading the notes gives you a deeper perspective that enables you to reread the chapter. So there is a distinction between the chapter and the notes of the chapter, and both kind of are in a dialectical relationship. That's a very original way of writing. So I can recommend everybody to read the book and to be as inspired as I was. So thank you.
Thanks a lot
for joining us tonight. I hope everybody is inspired too. The balances seem simple, but when you dive deeper into them, they become an extremely powerful way to look at reality, in terms of equilibrium, to look at reality in terms of layeredness, and to look basically at the full complexity as presented to us in reality. To close, I would like to invite everybody to join our 28th of April session, where we have Wim Fouquet as our guest. He recently promoted from HR director in the Benelux for DPD to a head office role in Paris for the GeoPost group. And he will share the story of how DPD as a package delivery organization transformed in the middle of the COVID crisis and took basically a very systemic approach in rethinking the key operations department. It will be a very insightful, practical and holistic perspective in the complexity of an organization over the last few months. And also don't forget the weekend in June for the Metaforum conference. You can find all information on metaforum.com or .org, Ivo. Org. So yeah. Metaforum with ph.org. And I assume, Ivo, that all the latest information will be found on the site.
Yes, actually, I shared it, and now I'm sharing it again. This is the page that explains everything about the conference. Of course, this conference could be postponed because we insist to have it as a physical event. And in the meantime, there are webinars, and the last webinar gathered 70 people. It was very interesting. So it's normally once a month or once in a few months on Wednesdays in the evening. But for the conference, that is now the 14th edition of that conference, and people come from everywhere, from all corners of the world. We are looking at having it physical, and it will be here in Leuven. Now it's intended for June, but let's see. The thing is that currently there is no fee for registration, so you can go register just for free to understand what is the interest, and then when the details are known, the rest will be announced.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you everybody for attending tonight. I think we learned a lot, and I'm looking forward to seeing you again in April. Enjoy the rest of the day or the evening. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.